All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 20 sessions of Concrete Matter Design Sharing. My name is Joyee Lee, and joining me as the co-moderator, Mr. Gary Yeow, one of the fellows behind XYZ Project. We will be your moderators for tonight's sessions. Our honorable panelists, Mr. Sun Yen and Ms. Alfa Ismail, are here with us as well. We would like to take this opportunity in the beginning of the sharing to thank them once again for taking their time to share with us their award-winning projects in relation to tonight's topic. We would like to make a brief introduction of tonight's topic, which is titled Resilience in Architecture. Resilience, according to dictionary, it is an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. The misfortunes faced by architecture are many, including but not limited to natural disaster, gentrifications, deteriorations over time, and other force majeure. The thing is, the fragile state of these buildings in the face of nature and time lead us to questioning the vincibility of architecture and thinking the idea of rebuilding and regenerating and restoring behind them. So without further ado, we would like to pass the stage first to Mr. Sun Yen, who will share with us his master thesis project, Seeds of Havana Dissolving Condenser, which has been nominated for RIBA Silver Medal Award by University of Westminster and awarded for the SOM Foundation Traveling Scholarship in 2020. So put your emoji hands together or click the reaction button below with the clapping hands on the top left corner of your screen, and welcome Yi Sun Yen. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Joyee.
Yeah.
And all right, let me get this screen running. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Great. So I'm gonna start going through the quick sort of summary of the project, and then I'll get through some site understanding, some background history, and then get into the research and then into the project. So, regarding the project, it's reflecting what is going on in the past in Cuba, and then how we as architects can take learning and lessons from the situation and then build onto it, and then providing a more like a framework to support rather than trying to lead or dictate what's happened next. So I'm going to start reading through this one, and you can also have a quick read through. Building on the spirit of collectivity and equal right to the city that Cuba has developed over the past 60 years of post-revolution era, the thesis takes a theoretical approach to invigorate the revolution aspirations by liberating the Soviet constructivist social condenser concept. Challenging the architect's pride in creating exquisite, the project proposes an alternative architectural approach where the proposed scheme appears, dissolves, and reappears across the city. The SEED, socio-economic empowerment device, acts as the dissolving condensers, which are distributed and injected across the urban void to construct situations for collective empowerment. The thesis mediates between the socialist structure and the rapid arrival of global capitalists in Cuba, forming a gentle subversion against the conventional facade-centric heritage conservation approach. The proposed condenser seed, growing from the voids, forged new collective hope in rebuilding the city and reassembling architecture from crumbling facade leftovers, an evident Cuban resiliency of creating something out of nothing. The project becomes a process in perpetuity, and eventually the city itself evolves into an ultimate version of new condenser of our time, and the site, Havana in Cuba. So throughout the history, due to its strategic geographic location and wealth of natural resources, Cuba has been almost considered as the center of the world, with various axes of power seeking to exploit its potential. And then because of its key location as a maritime conquest, it continued to play an important role between the power contest between nations like Spain, let's say throughout the Spanish colonization in the 15th century, all the way until the Cuban Revolution in the 20th century. And in between, you get Britain and America getting involved in trying to get a piece out of the Cuban soil. And so Havana is also the capital. As a capital, is often described as a Caribbean metropolis with a European blueprint, with all these sort of influences and trail left throughout this sort of power contest. And it's also being known as a city frozen in time, and because of what you can see being left in the urban grain at the moment. Within Cuba, the socialist ideology penetrates deep in the politics and also the people. So in the 1959 revolution, Fidel Castro, the leader, um, took over from the previous regime and had a had a dream of making Cuba as the world's greatest sugar producer as part of the um, socialist aspiration to bring it up to the world stage. And then they successfully get everyone to transform the land and then making them to contribute to the national plan. However, despite this of unsuccessful attempt, um, the Cuba the Cuban Communist Party again led another collective endeavor, which is in housing development, called or known as the Micro Brigada movement. These are essentially the prefab houses, concrete houses that are inspired from the Soviet Union, and then which is quite considered successful as they managed to build a huge number of housing throughout the nation. And through this event, the collective spirit and solidarity mentality is deeply embedded within the people until today, which will be a key element for what the project is built upon. And looking back, there has been under influence of local and foreign power throughout the history, and its cause of national development is determined by this all sort of various forces. You get financial power, which can be understood as the Cuban who fled after the revolution and now settled in Miami or Florida in America. They have been sending money remittance back to the um, relative and families in Cuba, and also the autonomy power, which is whoever has access or control of resources like fuel or food or supplies, you get a bigger decision making role. And then, of course, the administrative power from the state, the socialist state with its rigid system and constraint imply across the society, having control over people's life and urban development. And lastly, the foreign power, which you can imagine as the international military economic relation, and this can influence Cuba through investment and privatization. Like, for example, there are new special economic zone and businesses coming out throughout the the nation. And eventually, all of these forces are sort of rambling up into a storm, and at the eye of the storm is the people who has the collective power, but they have been always reacting towards this force and trying to survive with whatever situation has got to. So, and now this is the Havana that most people would see as a tourist uh, destination, which the government has recently tried to push it, well, before COVID, um, push it as one of the world uh, tourist venue for anyone. And then so you get like they try to drive investment coming in, and you get all these nice streets, lovely pastel colors. You get like humongous cruise going into the port, and then you get a hotel, which basically just built within the crumbling buildings while retaining the facade, which is painted white. In the end, they just kept it, but they built everything new. And and then the state focused on transforming all this of urban landscape to cater for the booming leisure sector, as almost can be seen as creating a new scheme to meet the visitors' demand, while at the same time hiding away um, the other part of Havana. So at the back, you actually look, if you wander deeper, you get to see a very different side of Cuba or Havana. This is and this project focus on Havana Vieja, which is the old town from the 14th century, which is probably started from the Spanish when they discovered the island. And and then I think looking beyond the colorful surface, you get a better understanding of Havana under the egalitarian state over half a century of U.S. embargo, and how the crumbling building remain as people dwelling despite um, the obvious health and safety issue. You get like you can see people hanging clothes around that sort of crumbling concrete blocks that probably would fall on your head anytime if you walk past it. And if you look at the right image, that is a spiral staircase. And to the left, there's a timber one. They only built this timber stair when someone actually, I think it was a young mom with his toddler had fell from the spiral staircase, and then that's what only prompted the council to build a timber staircase for the community, which is quite a intense situation. I think this also lead to a displacement of younger generation who sees no future to remain in Cuba, and causing the nation to lose what is considered its future hope. Because when there's no young people trying to fight for the future, it's just causing a vicious cycle of socio-economic imbalance loop. And then, so focusing on the old town Havana, you can see the the target has been aiming at the target of the government has been trying to rejuvenate mostly along the coastline and what they call the Malecon, which is the Cornish area with hotels and pubs, restaurants for the tourists. But for the rest of the city, they're just basically left untouched in this crumbling state. And you can see like the courtyards and which are not being used. There are people life going on within those broken structures, and at the same time, the street becomes a very important uh, feature. So you get the left image is basically what you're understanding as Grab or Deliveroo, Uber Eats. Instead of delivering to your room, you pull down a string and tying it to a fan, whatever the cover from the fan, and then you just pull it up. And people have been moving materials, construction materials, on the street because of the lack of fuel and petrol, or it's very expensive. They just prefer human labor. And also alongside, you get a lot of small street, private, it's not private, the citizen-owned businesses like repairing because you can't really replace anything easily, either cost or availability. You basically have to repair everything that is broken. And so part of the project started by what we call decollage, the Havana, basically peeling off what you have seen on the surface and trying to dig deeper, and you get that um, um, extreme. So you get the tourists coming in and the new hotels, the Capitol building, which is one of the key attraction. You get the colors. At the same time, you get the nice classic Cadillac car whizzing through with tourists, and alongside the building, which with some are without a wall, and you can see people sleeping or sitting there chilling. And so zooming in, this is part of the image to illustrate what the experience of walking through the street in Havana. You get like, if you can see my mouse, you get the makeshift market, and then the courtyard that is left hidden behind the street and facade. You get the tiny little stores owned by the community, and then opposite them, it's the state-owned supermarket, but they're mostly expensive, and the locals can't really afford. You get like bursting water pipe, crumbling buildings with playgrounds where the children are playing. And then another interesting fact is people are not really gathering at the courtyard or the houses. Instead, they're gathering at plaza because that's the only place they can access to Wi-Fi. Um, you have to purchase like a top-up card for Wi-Fi, and you can only use it at a certain spot, mostly public plaza or hotel or tourist restaurant. And so you get behind, you get like the really severe condition of the building that are crumbling every time, and people are putting up timbers trying to protect pedestrian from getting injured. You get, like I mentioned, the private business, which are most more affordable for the people, and then street vendors, the market that take place between the building that has collapsed a few years ago, and which is quite booming. People are getting fruits, getting um, the daily supplies, as opposed to the state-owned supermarket because that is too expensive. And then again, the hidden courtyard and the plaza. So what has caused this extreme polarization? Mainly, part of it is the dual currency system in Cuba. So there's a CUP and CUC. CUC is the convertible, which is equivalent to USD, but one CUC is basically 25 times. And to put into context, so the doctor or lawyer that works for the state basically earn about 15 to 30 CUC, which is about USD dollars per month. And then throughout the US embargo, a pair of trainers like your running shoes can cost 50, which is more than their monthly salary. And at the same time, it causes a really huge polarization where people who has connection to the state or with relatives overseas, or you work for foreign company, or even better, you work in the tourist sector like taxi drivers, tour guides, you can easily earn more than any professionals. And then the next thing is the food ration system, where you have to use this ration book. You get like probably I can't remember the numbers, like 3 eggs or 500 ml of milk every week, and then you basically have to follow your booklet and to claim. But always the supply shortage means you can't really get what was allocated to you even. So that leads to like a black market, a local exchange, and even though that's illegal, but it's just building onto into that cycle of food supplies and material shortages. And I mean, one of the interview that we looked at was, I think this scene particularly summarized it well. Cuba, since the revolution, has a lot of will, but it doesn't really have the monetary means to support the dreams. So one example is the revolution dream, where Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, they after the revolution, they had a dream of improving the cultural literature of the people and plan to transform like a huge golf course into a largest national school, like a school of art, to train the people and provide education. But unfortunately, because of what the architecture, as you can see in here, has caused a debate within the government and the parties that they are not reflecting their socialist ideal, and then the project just being left in ruins, even though the main structures are all built, as you can see. I mean, it's a shame we didn't visit this one. So these are from internet photos. You get like plants growing in and water's pulling. But I think they're trying to do something now, but it's a shame. Like they're really lovely structures. And then now that they, instead of trying to deal with whatever dream they had before, they just focus on taking tourism and making tourist money, because that is one of the best um, revenue at the moment. And then thinking about future, the project also speculate how thinking the China's Belt and Road Initiative are expanding throughout Africa, and then probably the next road is Latin America, and Cuba with its socialist ideology and government might be a interest of for the expansion. So the scene from Godfather's film also telling you how the society depicts Cuba as a piece of land, or almost a cake in this case, that are being split between like older forces from outside. This is like where the mafias are setting up their um, operations. And then so the idea is, how can we electrify this term, electrify the society again, building on what they have been through. And then so look at how the term social condenser from the Soviet constructivist through to 21st century architects, how this term reflect, trying to understand it from from the basis. And then a quick summary of the quote can be seen like, oh, an architectural device to electrify the people in the new way of life, or the creation of a new organism for for the people. So I think another quote I would like to bring in is by Anatole Cope, a French architect historian. It goes, like electrical condensers that transform the nature of current, the architect's proposed social condenser were to turn the self-centered individual of capitalist society into a whole man, the informed militant of socialist society in which the interests of each merge with the interests of all. I think the idea is this, where they take the socialist ideology and how you could interpret that through architecture devices or intervention to choreograph spatial configuration, and also to promote like the decentralization of spatial and political power. And then the other interesting thing is uh, Rem Koolhaas from OMA actually almost like quote unquote privatized the term social condenser through his publication. I think this is quite interesting how when the term was uh, originated for the socialist idea, but it ended up being privatized by a later architect. Well, I think the irony is quite interesting here. But and then so I looked at a few of other projects which can be termed social condenser in the past, like let's say Parc de la Villette and then now Convent House Unité. I think it's just to understand what are the interventions or how do these architects interpret the means to electrify or activate both spaces and people, and that leads to forming the urban strategy, or how you sort of resemble Havana. So after you decolonize, you sort of reassemble back with your intervention. And then, I mean, as previously seen through the microbrigada, the housing movement, the power of the people as a collective is evident, with a common goal and right incentive on leadership. People are capable of achieving something far greater. Um, the spirit, and then this sort of collective spirit is really specific to the Cubans, because it's kind of impossible to initiate anything similar in our modern society, like a capitalist society. Like everyone has their own interests to be onto. So I think this project aims to reinitiate this collective power and build on top of it, so that people can take back the right. And the idea is to break down the neighborhood into more sort of resilient unit or nucleuses that has their own functioning role, and they could work together. I think this takes from the idea from A Thousand Plateau by Deleuze and Guattari as well, like the idea of rhizome, like the root system where you don't get a main root and then that's split out, but instead every node are sort of working together in a network. Um, so just a quick 4 slides of um, flip book type thing telling the situation. So new hotels coming up, focusing on tourist industry, and then while most part of Havana is being left in a really bad state, crumbling buildings, and people are getting injured. So the project actually um, proposed to have a um, food intensify food and material production facility, that what it's called, like when you appear in the city, and then the next step is you distribute the seed devices throughout the city, like dissolving into the urban grain, and then later on in the end they will appear as growing through the void and forming a new um, face for Havana. and and that overall view you can see how the proposal sort of appear at the back, almost taking a back seat, like a humble position behind existing building, and you provide and you support instead of you just take up the front and just be in the spotlight. So I think, and then the project has two main phases or moment. Like the first one is you produce, like building on the previous idea of how they want to be the world sugar producer, or to produce enough housing for everyone. I think it's just building on the idea of intensify production through the socialist aspiration in the past, and then this one is aiming at tackling the most recent challenge, which is food shortage and supplies, because all the food and materials has been focused to cater for the tourists, like to build hotels or for restaurant for tourists basically. And then this can be read as a nutrient. And then the next one would be and the activation. So once you get the food problem and material problem sorted, that people can actually get participating or contributing to holding up or saving and patching up their city, rebuilding it physically and metaphorically. So the project actually works as a integrated organism throughout the site in the city. So the two spine closely intertwine and integrate to allow maximum efficiency in production, process, and distribution to the wider neighborhood. And then some sketches of exploration of the expression that sort of mediates between the revolutionary spirit and the dynamic flux of the people in terms of architecture. So a reflection of the use of concrete throughout the socialist revolution area, which most of the building are pretty much in that expression, an impression of permanence, like heavy, solid, rigid, and on contrast with the more ephemeral language embedded throughout. So you can see like more smaller unit that scattered across to which are embedded through the social regeneration element. And you can see like how the hierarchy of architecture is trying to express here the solid and then the more fluid lightweight units. And then intensify food production, you get like some incubators or elevated food urban farming, which trying to revive the once thriving urban agriculture since after the Soviet Union went down, and there's lack of fuel, lack of a lot of material for planting, and lack of petrol to transport the crops to the city or whatever, and that led to a sort of organic urban agriculture system. But then it has been slowly dying down recently. But this is trying to bring back and providing the framework for the people to come back and contribute to it. And alongside that, you get like the food production going into the hard way it's being processed and then eventually packaged, distributed to the city, and it almost like bringing the factory closer to the heart because of the transportation and logistic problem, and then using the site as a production facility. So alongside on the end, you can see like where the materials can the salvage materials should come in, collection of materials throughout the city, like where the buildings are too badly damaged to be safe or maintained, they will be taken down, and then by assessing whatever materials available, you bring back to here, being transported right into the heart of the facilities and being prepped for further reappropriation, which I'll come to in a minute. And then so within this strip, almost you get like intensified food production, you get the elevated food farm, plant, and then underneath you get like a shaded plaza where the lab producing food, and then at the same time within the behind the concrete face you get like almost like a factory line where the materials and food are being processed and people are building it up as prototypes within the space. And a reflection in plan, you can see how the process of food and material intensified production channels through at the heart of um, the site, where they are then distributed through um, the streets and the grain of the neighborhood. Um, as mentioned earlier regarding the forgotten courtyard and interconnectedness of the street, this proposal actually blends into what is creating like a new courtyard that is full of activity and bleeds smoothly into the street and plaza of the existing unit. It's almost like allowing the flow of people and product to be um, carry on like are currently now. And so that integrated production becoming part of the city function and also its built environment. And then the next is to thinking how the activation, the second moment of the proposal, how do you get um, the people into doing what is being imagined? So in between like the glamorous facade and the crumbling interiors, it aims to sort of bring a new charm through alternative social integrated heritage conservation strategy. So to challenge, partly to challenge the generic just retaining facade type of approach of heritage conservation. So the active involvement of community in the preservation, it can almost, how should I put it? You, the, the process actually is recorded and then the memory or the people becomes embedded within the heritage preservation, not just the building or the objects, but the lived memories, the daily life, rituals become part of the soul of the preservation. And in the end, whether a revolution or preservation without the people, they wouldn't have any meaning after all. And it builds on the Cuban ideology of creating something out of nothing, like, and then also like nothing as waste. For example, a lighter, they wouldn't throw away a lighter; they would bring it to the street vendors and having it refilled by using pesticide, which is flammable, which is probably not the most safety way, but that's how things are going on around in in Havana. And in terms of material, you can see a lot of timbers and scaffolding has been propping up the buildings, but they wouldn't know whether the buildings are really worth saving or the structure has been too badly damaged, partly because of the coastal location where the sea breeze are quite uh, damaging for the steel and concrete. And also like the fenestration, like windows, doors made of timber are being left there to weather without no one carrying after them. So the involvement of the community in doing something is proved to be workable because we went visit a local artists organization thing. So they managed to get the community into doing something. For example, this timber, recycled timber brick, and instead of paying them money, they were paying them mojito. And so it's just saying that the people are still willing to come together and do something with the right incentive and leadership. So I think this is what the project aims to be taking and building the momentum upon. And so from those materials, waste materials are being left on the street, they are being given a new life and being turned into an envelope for new spaces. And so um, through this sort of new scheme, the spaces are given a new opportunity for people to inhabit, and then the once crumbling spaces are reactivated into an extension of the current urban fabric. So, and then a little bit on the seed. So, which are the socio-economic empowerment device? They are um, technically a modular self-built unit, flexible to be standalone or integrated into the building as part of the conservation strategy. Um, the seed is planted so into the void and then of the crumbling building, providing like a framework to build upon while at the same time strengthening the structures um, at the building. So the framework of the seed unit is designed to allow maximum flexibility, encouraging the inhabitants to take initiative in making it unique and personal. For example, like whether the method of construction will be different depending of the people, whether they are from the rural area, which are mainly uh, more experienced in agriculture uh, or more vernacular building typologies, or where uh, the people is based in city where they probably more used to different type of construction or cladding material. And then on oh sorry, at the same time, this thing this unit has this sort of compartment that are allow them to be connected to either water or electricity uh, of the grid, just to allow them to bring back a sense of normal for their life when they are re-inhabiting these spaces. Uh, as as you can see on the left key, there's part of the site. It's what it's called a seed pasture. It's technically allowing like local either artists or any community to be in a short-term subscription or contract to be there to contribute. You basically put in your time and effort, and then in exchange of skills and accommodation, which you will be able to use it to benefit the wider community. So it's where the people would try and create like a prototype or like samples to showcase the possibility of how this seed unit can be used or can be like the tool that is actually here to allow everyone to use it for their own benefit. Some of the uh, process how you look at, so you get a building, you firstly of course in terms of structural safety you need to get in like enough strengthening structure, and then you take out whatever is too risky to keep, and then the seed goes in, and then it started to get built, and then eventually the people becoming the forces to let the seed to grow, to germinate, to flourish within all of these voids, and it becomes a formless and a sort of organic process throughout the city. So coming to an end now, the projects appear and then dissolve and then reappear through a different form, and which is when it comes out to the front, it's no longer just a key, or there's no dictated form or architecture style to it. It's mostly driven by the people, and in the end, um, this becomes like an ongoing process that replenish its momentum through solidarity and the collective spirit of the people. And eventually the city becomes an ever-changing condenser which is embedded within the finer grain of the society. And yep, so you get like um, carry on with the life, you get the people coming in, tourists coming in, there's no point of stopping that. You get like the nice Cadillac cars with tourists, you get the newly built or fancy hotels, churches, and then get where the materials coming in, collecting and the food farm, where the distribution of the food or the supplies to the wider community, and then the rebuilding carry on and spread across the city. Um, the courtyard becoming a place where the product and people are whizzing through, carrying on their daily route throughout the city, the street of Havana, the pasture where the seed is being showcased, and the Old Town Plaza, which is one of the key attractions, becoming part of the connection to the space. And in the end, yep, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yep, you may share your screen. Oh, there's a lot to absorb, I guess. I will have some questions over here. Thank you so much for sharing again. Yeah, so we can begin our Q&A sessions. So Gary, you there?
Yeah, I actually really fascinated by the fact that Sun Yan's study, how does it, is much more intensively on economic and political issues that intertwine into architecture. But my only question, perhaps not really directly to your study or your thesis, but my question would be, how do you see the role of architecture in this sense? Because it's much more like architecture I always see is a rather a byproduct. It's not really directly solving the problem in a way, but rather is like kind of like a facade almost. Of course, I'm not saying that it's not essential, but it's just that somehow it's not directly solving the human relations or the directly the imposed problems directly on politics or economy. So my yeah, I just thought that how do you see your architectural proposal could help in, I mean, apart from what you have presented, but in general, how do you see what we have been trained in a way that architectural proposal, how does it trigger or stimulates our urgency to the perhaps government or to the people to be more aware of the current issues that they are facing now?
Right, yeah, that's a good one. I think for me, I've always interested in how sort of architecture can be taking like almost a more humbler approach. I don't know. I think this is probably a very subjective and personal perspective, but I think there are people who think architecture can be one of the key leading or driving forces to almost like, I mean, to exaggerate a bit, like to save the world. But my take was to how can it be more like a contributor and provider and supporter from various uh, maybe sometimes less prominent role.
Mm,
And I think that's what this project is attempting to do. Like you almost providing you learn whatever context that is given, because every place, every country, every community is unique, and then there's no one style fit all solution. So it's always like getting your understanding, spending a really deeper understanding what is available, what is the driving force, what works for that particular target group, if you wish, and then build onto that, and using our creative skills that we've been trained throughout our years of training. And instead of just designing, I mean, it's not always about designing something that you can look at and there's like everyone will be like wow, but it's almost designing the system or the framework that people could tag along and take it away and grow it further with their own style, their own ideology. I think that's partly how things should
mm,
work, in my opinion. But of course, there are always different way to do it, and then it's a good thing. So there will people be leading a certain movement through, well, probably like through architecture in a sense, and then but there will be at the same time there are also people dealing with the other stuff that is maybe often overlooked or being left invisible in a sense. I think that's where we can get all everyone working on different things, and then
yeah.
something will get done.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you see architecture not really serving, as the designing new things, but rather from a almost like an investigation or forensic kind of point of view to look at the current or existing situation to review the issues that not as transparent or I mean politics not really transparent at all, but it's just that architecture as a kind of another layer to see how a country works. Yeah. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Joey. Perhaps you have another question.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, like, I actually like the answer that Sunil about architecture is more on like designing a system than rather than an actual product at the end, so people can adapt to it and then create changes afterwards. It's just my question would be, so when you're designing a system, you are actually have that's even harder than creating an architecture because there's no visible product in your mind. And I would just want to ask, like, how do you support that this system that you have proposed for the seat of Havana against the people in? I mean, how do you know it will work for the people in Havana, given that you design based on all the history, I mean, the history of the place, the event, and then, like, for example, you mentioned the people there will leave no waste behind, but these are just, I don't know, studies. So how do you draw reference to their crime rate, their literacy rate, and then how the food chain they're entire comes to picture and knows exactly this system will fit into their society? It's just, to me, how do you support that kind?
Um, I think part of the good is about incentive that I think I kind of brushed through quickly just now. Um, so if you want to get people doing it, I mean, to do
Yeah.
something, you need to they
Yes.
want to see
What is
what
in
are
my
they getting
interest?
in
Yeah.
return,
Yeah.
what's good for them. A bit similar to what you mentioned about the vaccination in Malaysia, like you get something in return, and then you to sort of encourage people to do it. I think this one this is in that particular context within the Cubans, I think even this is being endorsed by the local artist leader, which we met, and then he mentioned like it is everyone still had that um spirit to do something, to change, because they know they are not in a good state and things are really challenging. And they still want to do something, and they're just waiting for the right moment or the right thing to give them a reason to do it. Because we actually, when we were wandering around the city, we met a random guy started to approach us, and and then there was a funny moment that with his limited English and our group limited Spanish, the conversation just carry on. And then so from the conversation you can actually understand how even like just a random guy on the street smoking and approach us, as the way they think about how they should do to make changes. I think it's quite.
You mean the
interesting.
guy asked you how what should he do to make
So
changes to the city?
basically, he was approaching us as I think he was just trying to get some
Money.
tips for bringing us around. But he actually
Okay.
showed us to a lot of little niches around the city where we probably wouldn't walk into because with a locals alongside, you feel better to go into like. We
Yeah.
even went into like some of the flat because he was talking to the owner and it's like, oh yeah, they are from blah blah blah, they're students and stuff like that. But I think, and then we had a local contact as well who she I think she works for the council from the architecture and heritage department. And then actually in Cuba they get free education and free healthcare. Um,
Mm.
and and that's probably partly use up most of the
Resources.
GDP or whatever. And yes, so in terms of education and literacy, it's quite high because the the country is actually exporting a lot of qualified doctors, medical personnel to Venezuela, I think, in exchange of fuel and some other supplies. So there are quite a lot of highly educated uh, workforce in Cuba, and and then so while they still retain part of this previous revolution aspirations, so they know they can do something as a collective. um, but currently just because of financial and economic issue, everyone just want money. Like,
But do you see fit? Like the policy doesn't make sense to me. Like if you export highly good talents outside just in order to get like fuel or other resources that comes in, why don't you just keep the talents within your own country and then that
because
might generate revenue as well?
they can't pay like I mean, like I mentioned just now, they can't the state employee doesn't get paid really good. So a taxi
Oh,
driver, as long
might
as you
earn.
get a nice old classic cars, you just because we went on a few, and then
I
you
see.
talk to the driver and they say, oh yeah, I got this car from my grandpa, we spent some money refurbishing, paint it, change the engine, and then they now earning like 20-30 bucks every trip for tourists.
Oh
They just
no,
wander around the street and then tourists will get them, and then you I think they
I
earn
see.
much more than like a doctor or a teacher or an architect over there, which is just that um I don't know what's that called. Like the difference in payment and what you do is just too
Ridiculous.
too yeah.
I see. All right.
But I mean, in that
Mm,
sense, the people are still ready to do do something. They're waiting.
I see. All right. All right. Get it. Thank you. Yeah. So next on, Amiru Hakim. Hi. Nice to see you. You have any questions for our speaker?
Hello, hi. I just would like thank you, Sunyan, for a wonderful design. I would like to ask if you could elaborate personally regarding the Soviet constructivist concept. Is like, could you elaborate personally, like how does the Soviet constructivist relates to you personally? Yeah, I think yeah.
Just as a note to add on, I think Amiru is a researcher currently you're in your PhD studies, right, at the moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
In UM?
UTM, yeah.
UTM. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Sunyan, back to you.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so that's part of the earlier researches that I looked at when it comes to like understanding space, how could create, because back to the idea, like instead of creating a building, I was trying to attempt to look into developing like a framework, a system, and then that naturally leads me into understanding how what uh, uh, what the spaces could do in terms of inspiring the people into doing something, and which is reflected in the earlier sort of Soviet time, what they term social condenser. I know the term has been discussed over and over in various discourse, and then everyone can has a slightly different definition to it, and then like Rem Koolhaas has his own definition to that term, I think. But it was really interesting and also quite a crucial understanding process for me in developing my approach to the project. So taking that partly is because of the association with the Soviet Union, which is a socialist uh, background, and then also in Cuba they share a certain ideology, whether politically or the economic approach. I think it builds into like they share a lot of common points, and then I find that to be very beneficial in developing my idea along that line. And but that one started as the inspiration and what I can learn from them, and then the project is like an interpretation of that term into this context, and then it just grows on from that, and rather than sticking to the original one, because the different definition that came out by different architects of their time, it's almost like a reflection to their thoughts, to their ideology, or to the moment they are in at that time.
Right.
And this one, yeah, this
I-
one is
Sorry, I'm just gonna ask
a
you.
reflection on this situation. I hope that answered indirectly. And
Thank you for the elaboration. Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks. I think Yvonne has a question to ask, right? Yvonne, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks for the presentation. I think it's quite timely because recently the UN just voted on whether they want to end the embargo on Cuba. So basically US and Israel voted no, and the rest of the countries on UN voted yes to end the embargo. So this presentation was quite timely. And the biggest question that I want to ask after watching your presentation would be, I think architecturally the whole project is quite well developed, but I think like the biggest problem would be like the economic issue in Cuba. But I understand that like this economic issue could be a really tough question to like tackle architecturally because it's more like a global thing. So it's not just related to just architecture, it's more towards the relation between the US and between Cuba and different political ideologies, I would say, because like Cuba is a communist country. So I think my question would be like, because all this architectural system that you have designed, I would like to understand more like how do you procure all these materials and all these structures that you have designed in order to like interrupt the current state.
That's a good one, because part of the, if you remember, I mentioned briefly about the China's Belt and Road Initiative. This project actually speculates upon like in order to get that major funding, because of the similarities in terms of political ideology and the past um, event and stuff, that could be a potential spot for the major Chinese investment. I mean, that's part of the backstory and speculation of the project. And because this location could be a key one in terms of, because Cuba, obviously, they are not in a very friendly relationship with the US, because of whatever embargo and stuff in the past. And then it kind of naturally would lead to a connection or relationship being fostered between that part of the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, uh, um, initiative, and then because how it's sort of it could be also in the interest of the Chinese government in terms of getting a strategic location in the trade war with US and stuff. I think this is part of the academic speculation, but could be one of the potential. And because among the other countries in the region, you can see how they were um, facing challenges from the US trying to push them out. I think kind of when you get suppressed for enough, you try to find a new ally, and which so that one could be the one of the main financial or investment funding inflow to support this sort of first round of initiative, and then slowly when the locals are getting more experience, getting more getting understanding what is going on, they could take over and do their thing. And yep, that was part of the story behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunil, for answering. Thank you, Yvonne, for your questions. Yep, so I think we come to an end to the Q&A. We have any more questions? Maybe you can take one more from the ground. Or Gary, you have any? Or Alfa Ismail, do you have any questions? Or anything you want to say?
I really appreciate the presentation, and especially the first part when Gary's question and his answer was building it from the community and building from what you have and letting it grow. I really resonate with that statement. So like, it was a happy and exciting presentation to watch. So thank you for sharing.
Oh,
Thank you.
nice. So next up, we'll have Alfa Ismail presenting. So right now we will have a 5 minutes break. So to get your water or go to a toilet break, we will come right back to it. Thank you, guys. Yep. And those who need to leave, you may do so. And if not, please stay tuned, stay with us. We'll come back in another 5 minutes to Alfa's presentations. I'm just gonna take a toilet break. Gary, you can take care. Oh, Gary Chow already, no.
I'll be here.
Yeah. But that was very nice
You-
though, Sunil, the presentation.
Thanks. But I think it was a good trip in Havana because when the guy actually brought us to look around the city, we actually stumbled upon a courtyard, and then another uncle standing by the door smoking. But he couldn't speak English. He was speaking Spanish. And then he mentioned like a few words. We only managed to make out a few words like Enrique Iglesias and blah blah blah. And then once we get back to our hostel, we went a lot. So basically, that's where he shot his MV in that particular courtyard, and we didn't know. We just stumbled across the door, and then we walked into it, taken a few pictures, and then the guy actually told us, "Wait, let me share this. Can I actually look at it just now again?"
Wait, as in like the guy is shooting a music video?
No. I'm not sure if you know this guy.
No.
Oh,
Okay,
Eric
so-
Iglesias.
So this courtyard,
Uh-huh.
basically we walk into it, and then we didn't know it was within this MV, and then the guy actually told us.
Oh, cool. Can I
Ah.
just play it? It just
Can you
play
hear
it.
it?
You have to share your computer sound from just hover over to the option bar above. Just share computer sound. Can you do that?
Or either reshare again, but take the share with audio at the bottom.
Yeah. Actually, I just wonder like how the people there, like, is it very
Very friendly,
friendly?
very active. Also, I think
That's
the other
nice.
fun thing because of this, because in the MV there's a shot where they
Oh,
were
wow.
dancing in the street. So I actually put that into my
It's nice. Did you end your presentation with that music video as well? Like you should do that. After you finish presenting and then just dun, 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 dun.
And then it was just something fun when I was doing it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna put this little thing here. And also, if you look at this car here,
Mm.
I'm not sure if I can zoom. This car here,
Yes.
which is, I'm not sure if anyone watch Fast
Fast
and
and
Furious.
Furious. It is filmed here.
Yes, it was filmed in Havana. I
Oh,
don't know
wow.
which one was it, 7, 6, 7, 8, I don't know. So that was the burning car he was racing in.
Oh. You're having so much fun with doing the drawing.
When you
A
are
few
when
Easter
you're
eggs in the
pilot.
drawing.
Yeah.
This is how you find joy in misery. Then.
Yes, you need to get something out of the Photoshop.
That's nice.
Yeah,
Good
but I
advice.
just thought to throw some, I don't know, I hope it's not too formal question, but I just thought that what inspires you to get to Havana and Cuba? That's quite a different one. I'm not sure what's your personal background, but somehow cross into this but that's something foreign, it must be quite interesting as well, right, Sunyan?
Yeah, I think that's the unique point about the studio I was in. So
Ah,
this is the 5th year project. The 4th year project, well, we went to Oman. So the
ah,
studio tends to go to very different places. It's not just UK or European or American countries. So the tutors, my tutors, they're Palestinian and Iranian, and then so then their work, their personal, professional work are always also surrounding the sort of community or various um what do you call the sort of hidden or invisible community
mm,
part
mm,
in any regions. So I think that, I mean, apart from Havana, we were actually thinking to go to either South Africa or Guatemala, and then
mm,
last year they also went to Vietnam.
mm,
And so they're not picking the mainstream study trip destination like
They pick with a
Scandinavian countries.
purpose.
Yeah, they pick the one that gives you the maximum exposure into different
mm,
culture, different context,
Nice.
different
Nice.
background. And you can see the student who picked this studio are also majority are non European background.
mm,
Sometimes you get a
mm.
few, but you get like a lot more uh, diversity within this studio.
Nice. Good to know. I'm looking forward.
Yeah,
Because I'm going
it would
to
be great. Yeah,
Sunyan schools anyway.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway, yep. Thank you, those who stay with us. We're back from the intermission. Let's continue with the second part of our talk today. So next, I would like to introduce Miss Alfa Ismail. Her project, Architecture of Humility, was awarded the RIBA Norman Foster Foundation Traveling Scholarship in 2019, which explored the role of architects within community architecture in natural disasters zone. The project aims to examine cities affected by natural disasters. So she has done this project in 2 phases. The first phase was done when she was awarded the traveling scholarship from PAM, Malaysia Institute of Architects, and she did her research in Lombok. And this traveling scholarship that she obtained from Norman Foster Scholarship will help her visits continue to Japan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, which all these cities were devastated by earthquakes or other natural disasters. So she worked with local volunteers, organizations, and also met some incredible, well-renowned architects like Yasmin Lari. We talked about it earlier. So without further ado, let's welcome Siti Nurafaf Ismail. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. Good evening, everyone. So let's just get started. It's a very chill program, right? So first things first, as the introduction earlier has already stated, I went to 4 countries, and these trips were sponsored by PAM, RIBA, and Norman Foster combined. The poster was the poster that on the right was the one that I submitted to Norman Foster and got me the scholarship. This is also available online as with all the other past winners. So you can also check out all the past winners there. So as a timeline, because it gets very confusing if I don't explain the whole thing, because everybody assumes that this was a thesis or final year project. So first things first, when I applied for PAM Travel Scholarship, it was in 2018. It was right after my first year of part one. And then afterwards, I went to Indonesia in January 2019. Afterwards, I had a semester abroad during my second year, in which I applied for a Norman Foster Scholarship. And then 2 months later, there was the result. So the travel began right after the results came in. And it lasted for almost a year because I had a few breaks in between and ended just before the COVID-19 fiasco. And then finally, I came back in time for my second year part one. So the point here is that since with my experience as a part one student, I'm only doing this to document what has been done. So my travel research period, the total period has been about 5.5 months, and each country differs in terms of the duration. So Indonesia was my first place that I went. My mom followed me for the first country because she didn't trust a 20-year-old girl to go alone. And then afterwards, Japan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan was all individual travel. And Japan was the longest because I went to about four areas, 4 states in Japan: Hokkaido, Kumamoto, Shinomaki, Tokyo, and then like even Kyoto and places, just hopping around the country. So what this research serves is to document the communities and how they've rebuilt after a disaster. And it's just to look at how these different factors, because each country is different, right? You have different economic mobility, cultural and geography differences. But it's to say that, you know, each of these countries with their differences, the solution base that is very customized to that country is best. It is, you can't have, again, like what Sumi mentioned just now, you can't have a one fit all solution. That's why this research is served to prove that. So disasters in the research, at first I focused on just on earthquakes. For the PAM scholarship, it was for the Lombok earthquake in 2018. But then after the Norman Foster, I included flooding issues, typhoons in Bangladesh, as well as ethnic cleansing. So the ethnic cleansing is a very interesting addition because like when people heard of my research, they would think about natural disasters. But if I say it as natural disasters, a lot of the academicians will get very irked because there's no such thing as natural disasters, right? There's disasters. It just happens to have a natural method to it, but the cause is inherently human. So ethnic cleansing is also a type of disaster, and that can also aggravate more natural disasters to come. That's also an issue that I will look into. So another thing about these, the common denominator between all these countries are the people, the communities, not in terms of the cultural, but looking at them in human nature. These 4 things, they repeat themselves. The rules repeat themselves across all 4 countries and across cultures. The first would be individuals always seek to improve their environment. They will, no matter what happens, even if you give them the best solution, they will want to improve it in how they see fit. And then the desire to expand their territories, they will try to impose their own norms. So number 3 is very interesting, where if let's say an outside force, an architect or a designer or an organization from outside the community would try to impose their own design that does not fit or integrate very well in the community, they will reject it. They will accept it, but then they will change it and impose their own traditions and their own values on the state design. And finally, they try to avoid. They really don't want any intervention unless necessary. And as soon as they take it, it actually affects how they rebuild themselves during the next disaster and the next calamity. So these are by Professor Jamil Akbar that I learned during my time in Istanbul. So he taught about this 4 different framework on how people behave within the built environment. So the first country that I want to talk about would be Cox's Bazar, which is in Bangladesh, and it looks into ethnic cleansing, and as well as it's not just about the refugees, there's about 1 million of them in Cox's Bazar, but also about how they had to face natural disasters such as typhoon and a cyclone. So that's like a double whammy already. And I don't really talk about Cox's Bazar a lot when it comes to presenting my research, because this was the heaviest for me. This was the most mentally taxing to see and involve myself in. So the pictures would be how they place their shelters. It's staggered, and so this is the view from on top the hill. As you can see, it's very packed. There's barely any space. You have to be very careful where you walk. They try their best to have a proper system of waste management, clean water, and all that. But despite this, there is somewhat a system that is only known to the communities on the number of families who is part of this group, who is part of that group. So there's a very interesting system where there's given a not a blank page, but a certain program that's already set by it's not the authorities, but the group, the NGO, the authorities combined, and then the communities themselves will change it a bit to suit their own needs. And this is the shelters. So considering that our session is very quick, I just want to touch this very lightly. So what they did was, this would be about 4 shelters and they would face each other. And at first the system was that it's lottery. It depends on luck whether you get a house at which area of the settlement. But the villagers, they have a way, and they make sure to put all the relatives together in one block. So the 4 houses, usually they're all related, and it says it's 4 blocks, but actually it's 2 or even 1. So they combine it whenever they can. And what's interesting here is that the structure, they use bamboo, tarpaulin, and then cloth, a very patchwork kind of structure. And this is the same as Indonesia, Lombok, Indonesia. So halfway across the world, it's the same structure, it's the same building materials. So that was a very interesting, like, oh, it's like I'm in Indonesia again. And this is how it is in Bangladesh. So the thing about natural disasters and then the shelters after a disaster and then design for a disaster, you don't really see this. You see a beautiful design that is usually like lightweight, IKEA pack, something along those lines. But honestly, those things rarely supplied to everyone within the situation. It's only to a select few. And even then, those people find it, they don't accept it as much as others, like the community themselves would prefer this style, because this is reminiscent of their own culture and their own styles back home. So the language, the architectural language and architectural structure, how they name their beams and columns, it actually is based on their own language and their own home country. So it doesn't follow the Bangladeshi system, it follows the Rohingyan culture and language. So that's very interesting, because all the NGOs and all the organizers and all the builders are Bangladeshi. So there is that clash of culture, language, and system. But the NGOs and the people that's managing the settlement, they've come to like realize that, you know, there's no point trying to really put things at a very strict system. You have to let them do how they want, because you see, it's a house, but it's also a shop. So this is a house, it's a shelter, straightforward, it's a shelter. You're not supposed to do anything. You're not supposed to create a hole in the wall and combine 2 shelters into one. Then that's not fair for other families that only have one house, you know? But people will do it. So it comes back to the initial 4 points. They will impose their own norms. They want to change because at the end of the day, whether you're a refugee, whether you're a person in KL or PJ, your house is your house. That's your area. You want to change it based on your own values. So what this family did on the left, they just punched a hole in the wall and created a shop. So the people that actually go to this shop to get snacks, to get coffee, and on the right here, it's their own effort to create something like a farming system. So they plant whatever seeds that they could buy, and they plant it on the side of the house, on the roof even. So that is the outside view, and here is the detail of how everything is structured. So on the top left is the breakout space, something like a patio. So this patio wasn't in design provided by the NGOs. This wasn't provided by the organizers of like the managers of the settlement. This was done by the communities themselves, and each of the families have their own way of designing. So it doesn't always look like this. It's not always on the side. Sometimes it's at the front, sometimes it's at the back. So it depends on each family, and they build it themselves. They find materials, God knows how, and they work around what is already there, and they find ways to put their own values again and their own importance of what they believe. This is my home, because even though it's a temporary shelter, it's a home. It has to be a home for them. And then what was interesting about Cox's Bazar was the hospitals. The reason I could even be there was because I was working with a hospital. The area itself was there was high security. You can't just like enter the area, right? So hospitals became an integral part of the areas that I visited, the buildings and the topology and all that. And what was interesting was that the system and the architectural style that they use almost mimic the shelters of the refugees. They still have the same kind of like the roof kind of pattern that helps to hold down the tarpaulin so that when there's a cyclone, it won't immediately just pop off. And then the bamboo textiles and everything. So again, it mimics what is already there and trying to make it as comfortable for the refugees as well as the locals, because the hospital is not just open for the Rohingyans, it's also open for the Bangladeshis, the locals themselves. So next would be Pakistan. So this is a zero carbon cultural center in Makli, Pakistan. I visited Karachi, and that's the base, that's the office of Yasmin Lari, the architect. And then from there, we would usually go on site visits to Makli. So Makli is the area where she's trying to shake things up. And the first thing that is like, to me, the most prominent project from her would be the chula, which is the stove. And it's interesting how it's a stove, right? It's not a shelter, it's not a house, it's not an urban plan, but it's a stove. But this stove was really important for the community. What they usually had was a very small, maybe 300 by 300, 1 feet by 1 feet, kind of like stone that's lifted off the ground, and that's their stove. That's how it used to look like. But now what Miss Larry has created is kind of like a platform that has it's not just a platform and a stove, but it's also an activity area. It's an area where they can really have pride in what they do. And it's not just something like, because women and children are not usually involved in the process of rebuilding. And even in communities where the communities here in Pakistan, what they usually deal with was flooding. And the issue with flooding, as you all know in Malaysia, it is not the severity, but it's the occurrence, the frequency. So if it's just a simple flood once every 10 years, that's another matter. But if it's a flood every year, it chips away at the community, it chips away at the spirit of the community. So what this stove does, not only lifts the platform, lifts the spirit, and literally put the place of the women of the family above, not like above just on the simple floor, but on a platform. But in case there's a flooding, then at least their kitchen won't be flooded, and there's also hygienic purposes. So this was the project that really elevated the whole community. And the thing about architecture after a disaster, this is where Pakistan really enlightened me, because this Larry, her system was more of she had a framework. She can't just do shelters. So she had to provide all 4 aspects of a basic need. You need to provide shelter, that's one, but you also need to provide proper hygiene, clean food and water, and lastly, education or training. So if let's say you miss one of them, then it's an imperfect solution, and then the whole thing would crumble. It's as simple as that. So let's say you provide a house, but you don't have a solution for the kitchen, for the hygiene, for how they can train themselves to be self-sufficient. Then there's no point. A pretty house would just be broken down for them to sell the materials and get money. That's usually what that happens in situations where the NGO would come in, drop a house, and then leave after a few months. And what she's done at Makli she's been there for about 2 years, and it's an ongoing process. So other than elevating the woman's status in the family, it's also providing them as a way to, they train other women in the community to build this and then sell that skill. So that's a source of income as well. And then other than that, she has also made sure that the toilets are well designed, the shelters are well designed, and all those things are trained. Wait, my slide is not moving. Okay, here. So this is one of the houses that they've tried to prototype. It's not really for the locals, it's for that area to see whether can the locals build it again? Are they comfortable with this? So there's a lot of prototypes that they've done, and they've at all process they involve the locals to see whether can they acclimate to this style. And then again, like I said, there are material and build workshops to make sure that they're upskilled, they are able to carry this, and they can make money from this. Because if you don't have money, you can't buy food. If you can't buy food, then you have no energy for making sure your shelter is well maintained. And then if you don't have hygiene, then what's the point of having good food? Because you're going to get sick anyways. So all of that needs to be a framework that looks at all aspects of human basic needs. So that's what I really learned from Miss Larry. I spent with her about only 2 weeks, but I learned the most in terms of that you can't just do a shelter. It has to be a more holistic approach on disaster management to make sure that there's a real impact. And then next would be Lombok. So this is the disaster. The one thing that was interesting was that the disaster is a bit spotty. Like some houses crumbled completely and some houses stayed upright. And the thing about this was that in Lombok, just a history, they have very, not to say bad, but very loose standards on concrete buildings. So what happens is that buildings that are built too quickly without proper safety standards, it used to be fine. Like they would stand, they wouldn't fall immediately. But when there's an earthquake, it would just flatten. Absolutely. And what creates it's a very traumatizing experience. So the effect of that is that people started to not believe in concrete structures. So the rebuilding, I will get that to later. The shelters that they built afterwards became kind of a hybrid of concrete and then timber. So these are the maps from my research. The reason that I had maps for Lombok as opposed to the other countries was because Lombok wasn't a state that usually had maps. Like there wasn't any real formalized drawings of maps and areas that I could get to other than Google Maps. Google Maps can only go so far, you can only see trees. So to really formalize the area, I had to do maps on my own, and this was a steep learning curve because it was my first country. And going into that, this is the areas. So I visited about 4 villages, and the first village was Dusun Jaringodaya. And they actually had about 41 people. And the process of the research was that I would visit the area first. So that small house on the right, the bigger house compared to everybody else, that's the village chief kind of like headquarters. So I would usually ask them first, which village are you comfortable with me going? And then which house you think that they're comfortable with me visiting. So that kind of process repeats itself with all the other countries, especially in Japan as well. Visit the headquarters, ask them which family is comfortable, yada, yada, yada. So in this area, the family that I'm focusing on would be Pak Subo's shelter. So he was one of the first few that really had a shelter built because because of his background in construction. He was actually a contractor in Malaysia. Not surprised there. And then when he came back, he was in Lombok for a few years before the earthquake happened. And with his skill, he immediately, he stayed, he didn't leave as soon as everybody else. So this was his shelter. And back to the original history of concrete structures, and then now they're moving towards timber and lightweight structures because of their fear of concrete. So what is very interesting, where half of it is usually concrete, and then the top half is, it depends on the area. Some areas like here in Jaringodaya, they use timber panels and then some timber framing, and then after that is like metal deck. But other areas, they actually use bamboo. So, but then they still use half concrete, which is very interesting because they're not actually communicating with each other. It somehow became like a trend maybe, but that fear of concrete was there, but they realized that concrete is important. It's cheap. It's cheaper than most, but they still need to use it, but they're scared of it. So the point here is that when it comes to designing after a disaster, we have to consider the mental readiness of the people there, because just that after a disaster, that trauma, the traumatic experience, they might not be ready for a house that looks exactly like their old house, number one. And number two, they might not be ready for a house that looks completely different from their old house either. So there was another house right in the village, a prototype that was made entirely of cement board and steel frame. They didn't particularly like that as either because it felt so foreign. They weren't 100% sure of the safety of that structure, even though it is safer than whatever they have earlier. So this was the interior that I wanted to show. And again, there was the patio at the back. And this was interesting because it was a piece of luxury, and each family had different allocations of luxury that they could afford. Back to Bangladesh and same as Pakistan, and then here, as soon as you give them a house, they will find a way to maximize their comfort and put into their values. And each family will have different priorities. Like some people, they don't need doors. They just want a patio that has the morning sun. They don't really need a large window at the kitchen even. They don't need a door to the toilet even. And that's unthinkable for a design aspect. You know, if you just do this for a school project, you would immediately get kicked. But when it comes to real life situations, with the lack of budget, with the lack of resources, there's not much. And you can't just, it's not necessarily you have to tick all the necessary boxes. You have to ask, what are the necessary boxes? What is necessary to the survivors of the disaster? It might not be a door, it might just be a patio. So that was a very interesting point. And another thing was the extension. So this shelter was always extended whenever he has enough materials and funds. So I was very lucky that I was there for about a week only in this particular village. And during that time, he already had this one up. So I'm pretty sure like if I visit there again 2 years later, it would be a completely new house. And this materials were actually from the NGO. The NGO provided cement board and metal structure, right? So considering that Pak Subo already had a house, right? So he felt like, okay, I'm not going to say no to the materials, but obviously it's going to be an addition to what I already have. So I'm not going to just move into a new structure. And then next is the baruga. So this is more of a mental thing. A lot of the villages that I visited, they use this as their shelter. This is their shelter. Despite having another shelter prepared for them by the NGOs or by the government, by the authorities, they preferred this. Why? Because this was the one that was left standing during an earthquake. If you remember during the first picture, the whole household was decimated, but you have the baruga right there on the left. It's just like as if there's no damage at all. And that happens all over Lombok. And what is similar and it creates in the fact that people believe that structure to be the safest thing in the whole country. There's no earthquake that can ruin that. So one option is that you build next to it, like Pak Subo has done, and some people they build around it. So there's another project, but due to lack of time, I won't be showing that. But this is one of the samples where they just make that as the house. So that's their house. They prefer this over tents. They prefer this over even container boxes because it gives a sense of mental safety. You think that this is not really safe because there's no wall, but it's more of a mental thing. You want them to feel like I can sleep here without feeling waking up with anxiety and things like that. Lastly would be shelters in Japan. So Japan is very systematic. Like it's systematic. Everything has the same design across the country. Like I traveled to multiple states and they all pretty much look the same. So they have a very set system. The government has got their plan all together. But what was interesting was that they have different house plans for depending on the size of the family, depending on the the jobs of like the economic background of the family. Like if you are a farmer, then the house would be drastically different. But this house, I'm just showing one, it's a 1DK. So it can be converted into a bedroom. So the living room is converted into a bedroom at night. And what was interesting was that they made sure to sandwich this house with family houses. So they're not putting all the 1DK into one group and then all the 2DK and family houses in one group. They're sandwiching them because of a case back in, I think it was the Kobe earthquake. And what happened was that they separated it. So the elders with one group and then the families with one group. And that created a very bad mental cloud because literally you're just separating the single occupant. So that's one thing that Japan is very interesting to look at. They have the structure right, they have the planning right, but they're looking into the mental stability of the occupants. How can we tweak it to make it better than just a roof over their head, right? Because a disaster doesn't just affect your shelter, but it also affects your mental well-being. Whether you can, in Pakistan, it's about whether you can make money or not. In Bangladesh, it's whether you can be safe or not. But in Japan, are you happy to live? That's the question, because you have everything already, and if you're still unhappy, then it's no longer about survival, it's about living. So that was a very interesting point of view. Another thing, even in Japan, they're still trying to enforce their own design. So the walkway, the roof over the walkway wasn't an original design. It came from the community themselves. So that's a space that they created for the neighbors to just come and hang out. And then some of them created like gardens outside, even though like technically speaking, it's very like how do the plants grow? But they managed to do it, and it's really amazing to see that, you know, despite all these different cultures, the individual sense of wanting to impose their own values still stand firm. And lastly, in Japan, they have Mina no Ie. So basically, it means everybody's home, and each settlement or each group, each cluster, let's say about 80 houses, they will have one or two of these. So that's the community center where they meet and they talk about, well, like what if there's a dispute about the rebuilding of houses? What if there's a discussion on whose community gets to be rebuilt first? Who are we prioritizing first? So this is interesting because it's a movement, it's a project across Japan, and they have this all over Japan. It's very interesting that how it just spread. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ismail. Thank you. Wow. Okay. I have a few questions here. So if you don't mind, I start asking them.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I think my first question would be, so it's very interesting that you presented all 4 countries and after the natural disaster and how they rebuild and everything. But across 4 countries, right? I just want to know that which country, in your opinion, that has really like well allocate their resources and funding. So after the disasters, right? So the families of the victims, they receive all this money to rebuild their shelters, right? In all of these 4, which one has done like in outstandingly, in your opinion?
I mean, if it's about the distribution of resources, obviously it's Japan. Objectively speaking, it has to be Japan, hands down. They've
because of the
everybody,
technology.
yes, they've made sure like, and what's interesting is that they don't skim on the cultural importance of the families. One thing I didn't mention just now was that each shelter, even the 1DK, has a bathtub.
Oh wow!
Because that was very important to them culturally. They need to soak every day in the evening. That's like one thing that it gives them a peace of mind, which was very interesting because if you're not from there, if coming from a Malaysian,
that we don't need that culturally. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct.
But they have that, and it was very like, oh, and it must be next to the washing machine, so you can just divert the water.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
But speaking of detaching, I'm also looking at like how long do they take to, you know, react the entire thing, because I'm also looking at the duration as well, because the moment that the natural disasters strike, and then actually how long do they have to stay in this refugee shelter? Because the longer you stay, the more needs that you have, right? Not to mention like later on, do you need religious building? Do you need leisure activity space, stuff like that?
Interesting. This is not specific to Japan, right?
No, I'm just asking.
So in Indonesia, the first building that they built was the mosque, because that was the community center, because that's based on the culture, right? In Indonesia, it's a I don't want to say it's a Muslim country, but it's like imposed Muslim.
As in after the natural disaster strike, instead of building the shelter, they build the mosque first.
Yes, they built the mosque first. Wait, like I have a so if you can see here, oh no, okay, wait, let me just see all slides. So right here, there's one building that's a bit like shifted to the side. That's following the Qiblat. So this is the mosque. Wow. This is the first building that they built, and then only then they start working on their own individual shelters.
I see.
But that's Indonesia. When it comes to Japan, each of them stay in schools. So the Japanese system when it comes to disaster is that their schools are built to last and be converted into a emergency shelter. So the proper timeline would be, you have a disaster, then you have the emergency response, so you immediately go into schools, and then you have the recovery phase, which is you go to shelters, and then after that you have finally you move into your rebuilt houses, ideally speaking. But most countries, they get stuck in the temporary shelter phase. They never get a house.
Why?
Because of funds, because of resources, also lack of skill and energy. That's what happens in Pakistan.
I see.
They get stuck because the flood happens so many times every year. Then they just get exhausted. Like, what's the point of building a house if it's just going to get broken down in the next few months?
Oh my God.
You know, and then they don't really understand the structure to make it foolproof, or like not flood proof, but at least flood resistant. So there's also that issue, and then they don't have funds. So that's what Yasmin Lari was trying to combat. She created a solution, but she made sure that the solution can be monetized, so they have funds to rebuild their life. She made sure that it is able to cover all aspects in terms of like education, training, hygiene, food, and then shelter. So that was Pakistan. And then Japan, usually you'll get the house. Japan wouldn't get stuck, but if they do get stuck, it's because of their own, because of the individual. There's a lot of cases where people do not want to move out of their temporary shelters. That happened a lot in Kobe. One of the earliest, most devastating earthquakes that, if you read through, the government wasn't very quick on handling the earthquake. What happened was that it was a bit slow. So there wasn't a task team. Currently the community authorities are able to take the reins when it comes to a disaster. That's the current ruling. But back then they had to wait for higher ups. So
this is in Japan.
This is in Japan.
Okay.
So in that time of waiting, a lot of people died. So that's why they changed lah. They changed, but because of that situation, it was a very devastating disaster. A lot of people, even from that, in that scenario, they don't leave the disaster. When I visited Japan in 2019, there were still some people in the shelters. Yeah, so it was really quite bad. So that's why the current solutions focus on integrating any like lone survivors into the community. So they made sure to alternate one decay with 2 decays. So that was very like, it was a highlight. It was a very important part of the design as the whole, as a town, as a small settlement.
Yeah, I agree. I think it shouldn't wait for a higher up to react, in a way that if the community can act on their own. This is like a very prime example of architecture without architects already, right? They did their own improvisations, they make their own buildings. I think Gary has something to say about non-architect stuff. He's very into like the role of architect. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joey. That's pretty much my thesis about, and I thought to ask Alfa about this question as well. but maybe I can throw the question first, then maybe I can add on what the context of the question that are coming from. The question is actually, what do you think that we need architects, and also what is the demand of architects, especially like perhaps it's my recent involvement with students, and then they also ask like, do I need to get part 3? Do I need to go with part 2 to be architects? If I didn't finish my part 3, do I still valid as an architect? And all and so on and on. So the reason why I will ask this is because it comes from 2 directions and also contributions of the background. One is that the reason why we need architects is because of function and aesthetic. And speaking of function wise, is the reason why we need architects, because like you said, it's because of the hygiene and also safety and health. Otherwise, we don't have to get involved, because like you said, if get involved the architects, it will alter their way of life in a way. Like they already live like this and they don't mind living in a house without window. It's okay, it's their preference, right? It's their cultural things. So in that case, I think the reason why architects come in, like I said, is because of health and safety. And also this you also mentioned, like perhaps it's got inspired by Jimmy Lim's architecture of humility, this kind of writing, like perhaps in 1994. He was talking about suppression of ego. But in speaking of ego, it's not something bad. It's a take on decision, because you've gone through the architectural profession and education. You think what is the good, what is the bad. You think natural ventilation is good. You think the floor should be stable. You think the column should be stable, should be strong enough to support the building. But this also something related to our measure, because we measure by what is good architecture as what it should be, right? But for them, perhaps that's not the measure for them. They think that as long as there's a roof, it's okay. I don't care what's called concrete or timber or whatsoever. That's from the function side. For aesthetic, it reminds me of Hassan Fatih. He was talking about architecture for the poor. This is something perhaps very related to Bernard Rudowski talking about, right? Architecture with the architects. And he was talking about new architecture that is valid for both poor and rich. Talking about to change our mentality where poverty is not really ugliness. Perhaps this is something very closely related to Saxon talking about third world aesthetic. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. And again, the question is, what is your reflection? Perhaps you have different kind of thoughts on that, because we need architects more than what I said just now. Yeah, I just thought that what you have things to add on that.
So the main crux of the question is about the architect's ego, right?
Yeah, and also why do you think we need architects too? I mean,
yeah, that's a question that I'm trying to ask and reconcile myself throughout, because my journey was that it started right in the middle of my degree. So coming from a first year student, like excited about architecture, yada yada yada, and then seeing suffering, pain, destruction, all that face to face, and then going back to second year, I had problems assimilating, because I really couldn't wrap my head around what's the point of architecture, what's the point of like why. Because I'm not saying I disagree, I'm not saying I dislike that architecture generally, but personally yes. But it's like I don't want to say I want to reject it, but personally I think I'm trying to come to terms with that, where what I believe in is that based on evidence, based on the evidence of these case studies, you don't really need architects. You don't really need architecture unless it is more of an intervention of structure. And even then, like it can be a structural engineer, it can be a craftsman, it can be just anyone, just like Yasmin Lari herself. She has an immense knowledge of the culture too. She has immense networking ability, so that she's basically like everybody like toolkit for that problem. But I'm not surprised if she's a policymaker. I'm not surprised if she's a politician and she can get things done. But because like whether architects are important, I'm still trying to find an answer to that, because like I'm trying to like say like what's the point of me continuing my part 2? I barely finished my part 1, So if I could do what I want to do and what I believe in outside of architecture, why not? But then architects, there's this one quote that really sums things up, I think. Until all people's basic needs are met, we should reject design. We must reject architecture. I can't remember who's the author of the quote, but I think that resonated well with me. Like, until in that context, in the context of a disaster management, until all basic needs are met, we must reject architecture, we must reject design. In that context. But in a context of like a developed country, obviously that's a bit too harsh to replace. Well, why if there's no art, what is civilization kind of argument? That's another argument, and I'm not saying that I'm going against that. I believe in that.
If I'm allowed to interject, right? I'm actually on the other side of the argument, because I feel, yes, right now we are talking about architecture without architect. It's justifiable because in a way right now we are in the context of like refugee shelters or in a rural or suburban kind of area. But if you're coming to buildings such as airports or like hotel or like a seaport, these buildings and architecture requires high technicality or higher knowledge to coordinate with other specialists. Then I think the role of architect is very of paramount importance here. And also, I think the role of architect is also help to legislate the rules, because when you have more and more population in the city or in the country, and then you are building denser and denser building. I know housing is a very subjective topic, but if a lot of people are going to need housing, and then a lot of them is going to, like an artist do their own house, then there's no standards to standardize everything. There's no rules really. So I think the role of architects more sometimes is like a police as well, to make sure that everything is following certain guidelines while still expressing your creativity, and also to help in building condos and flats and whatnot. So I feel that the roles of architect is still very important, but depending on the context. This is just my 2 cents. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Alfa, you go ahead.
Yeah, Alfa, go ahead first.
But in terms of disaster management, right, architects are both not enough and too much. That's what I've seen so far. Like, there's not enough in the right places and in the right intention, but there's too much in other like aspects. Like, we hear a lot of times competition for disaster shelters, but then that thing is designed in silo. It's already designed in the context of a studio without the pain and the adversity right there. It's very different. So there's that gap, and I really like trying to consolidate that myself. Like, there's not enough architects, but there's also too much architecture.
But can I ask, like, even in the refugee areas, so when they started to build their own homes over there must be a leaders among the gang, right, who kind of like lead the entire socialist movement. So
it's the carpenter from Rohingyans, the Rohingyans themselves. So they take up leadership.
So in a way, the carpenters sort of like wear the hats of an architect already. It's just in a informal way, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I just wanted to add on to conclude what's a perspective from Alfa and also Joyee. It really depends on how do you see role of architects, because Alfa sees architecture as a need. And then Joyee kind of architects as a one. We could have just lived without airport. It's okay. I mean, it depends on what kind of context, right? If let's say you are talking about modern world business, okay, fine. I understand airport is necessary, and hotel or whatsoever.
Good point.
I mean, and also Norman Foster Foundation. I mean, a lot of time we don't need in building, but that's a one, right? We expand business, then we need a new city hall or whatsoever. But I just wanted to ask Alfa, because perhaps that's something will strengthen your hesitation about your study as well, because you quoted Shigeru Ban as well, because Shigeru Ban is much more from the Joyee side. He's saying that money is invisible, that's why they hire architects to express their wealth and status. But this is something very interesting, because it somehow counter-react to the point where, whether Alfa you have experienced where the point, this is something to do with architecture education, where most of the time we were given brief, and then we need to design something new, and then we have to come up floor plan section, and this is my design, blah blah blah. But perhaps Yuan can add on maybe later lah, because I found that a lot of times architecture don't need a legit tangible solutions. A lot of times solutions couldn't be explained by drawings or sketches. They are rather by drawings or not drawings, but diagrams or by writings to outline the policy or things. So I wonder, architectural education wise, do you wish to change anything to to change how we see architectural education, not just about buildings and facade or windows, but there could be more than that.
I do agree, especially on the writing about policy making. There is like that sense of that you do need to consider, because that's what Yasmin is doing. She's not just doing architecture, she's really like rewriting the policies and making sure that it's a holistic approach. But in terms of education, right, I've gotten into a lot of hot water in you for saying too many things. I don't like, so I'm gonna keep it brief. But I need to graduate, okay, get my scrolls and then
I'll post this on YouTube, this recording, and then you can just share the lecturer. This is my take anyway.
They can't pernah hold a student scroll, right? Also some like drama, so some. But in terms of education, I do believe that it needs to be a bit more open-minded. First sentence dah kepang. But it needs to be open to both pros and cons. What I've personally experienced is that the education, I don't know about other countries, but in Malaysia, they want to look at things in a very bubble sense, a beautiful manner. There's no budget, there's no structural limit. The user is this and this and this, and then like everything's happy. The brief is about whether tourism or healthcare, or there's nothing dark about it. But honestly, a lot of the world is very dark right now. And you cannot look at things from a pro point of view, but you have to look at it from a con. So there should be more freedom for the student to look at things like, this is how bad the world is, and this is what I'm trying to combat it, even though it's not a popular opinion. Like it's not a popular opinion to say that tourism is bad. Yeah, you have to say tourism is good. Personal experience.
For example, in Cuba, is it?
Yeah, in Havana.
Exactly.
In Havana.
I was
Those damn colorful facade, man.
I was enjoying his presentation because I was like, oh my god, if my lecturer could see this, I would be very happy. But but it's like that, it's not about everything. You can't just talk about all the beauty in all the life and you adding on to the beauty. There's a lot of problems too, a lot of shit happening in the world. So you have to look at it from an objective point of view for it to have a mature sense of, like a perspective on the world. So that's my take on the education. It should be a bit more dark. It's too positive and too hippie that if they were to go on site in Bangladesh, I think half of them would just break. Because I personally broke. I broke because I was literally in the hospitals and had to see things. I was working in the hospitals. I wasn't just a bystander. So I was like in front of literal pain, suffering, and then shelter, and then people doing questionable things to survive. But it's questionable, but it's just to survive. And that is the client you have to work with, right? That's the situation you have to work with. It's not usually just a businessman that has one kid and a wife.
I have a question.
Yeah,
because you mentioned about like we should talk more about the dark side, right?
Yeah,
so I think in your presentation you didn't elaborate more about like the ethnic cleansing part of your stuff. Would you like to like briefly talk about that?
Oh my god, I'm really scared to talk about that.
Maybe you can.
That, right?
Okay, maybe we can stop recording and talk about this.
Pause the pause. You can pause. You don't have to stop. Just pause it.
Oh, okay. Ken. Thank you, everyone. That's it.
Is a majority. So I thought to ask about your opinion on this. Like, how do you see applying for or encouraging young people to do this? Maybe just a fun fact, because I know Alfa through Pamela, and this is somehow give me a very hopeful youth spirit in this sense. Yeah. Yeah, maybe Alpha, you want to start first? Yeah.
Um, I think I read about the Norman Foster Scholarship since I was 16, Form 4, when the flood happened. So I don't know how Google led me to that website, but I read about it. So and I read about all the other like solutions for flood issues, because the Kelantan flood was really bad, and I was involved in it as a St. John member. So like seeing roughly, like not firsthand, but the helplessness was already starting. And then when I was doing the PAM scholarship, it was right after my first year, right? And then I went to the semester abroad in my second year. So that semester abroad, I was away from everyone. Technically speaking, I was alone. And I realized that, oh, the deadline's approaching. This might be the best chance for me to apply in like ever. So I applied using the Lombok result. So the point here is that I didn't even tell anybody. I didn't even tell Dr. Azam, my tutor, that I'm applying to Norman Foster, because I didn't believe I would get it. So I didn't tell anybody. Because I was worried. It's an Asian thing. You don't tell people until you're sure you get it, right? So I have just applied blindly. And then I just remembered the saying that if you don't apply, you're not going to get it. If you apply,
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, you might not get it also. So it's just the equal opportunity kind of like statistic. That's the best advice I could give to anybody. Like, if you just try, you might get it. If you don't try, you definitely will get it. It's the same with PAM, because the PAM, they had two spots open, and the other winner was we were both from UM. The other winner was in fourth year, and then I was in first year. So that was that gap in experience. Obviously, like, I didn't apply due to my experience. I applied due to my interest in the topic. And I during the interview with PAM, I immediately like said that, like, I don't have much skills. I barely know CAT, but I'm really interested in this topic. And for Norman Foster, the same. I made sure to convey that I was invested in the topic, and I really wanted to visit these places, not because of travel per se, but for research.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about, sorry, interrupt a bit. I'm not sure about Nabila. So I think, I'm not sure about the scholarship criteria. So, because earlier on you were saying that you would like to take the opportunity to travel as well, to do what Alpha is doing in the humanitarian kind of design.
Yeah.
Irregardless of, I don't know if there's an age restrictions or whether you're students or working, maybe if you have the intention, you just send the proposal right away, right? And then they'll see how much committed you are, and then they'll consider the proposal, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I really admire Alpha's spirit in this sense, because a lot of people definitely they wanted to do that thing, but execution is another level where you have to push yourself to at least create a A4 paper of your thesis proposal is another level, I would say. It's you kind of put some hope inside there, even though you might think you might not win it, but then you keep at least like maybe 0.1%. You might win it.
Stalking the Instagram page for like 2 months. Like, have they printed out the paper yet? Have they put out this? Have they like done yet?
Yeah, we should direct the questions to Sunyan as well, because Sunyan's proposal, the final project that he has presented, also won SOM Foundation Traveling Scholarship. So you want to share with us the process behind and also some thoughts?
Right. Yeah, I think. Sorry, I lost my thought.
No, we're talking
Right,
about the traveling scholarship. Yeah.
No. I just want to hinge on a bit on the Alpha proposal. I think this one is really amazing, and it could easily grow into a proper PhD research, and that could give you even more ground to look into wider support around what you would want to develop it into. I mean, the context, the understanding, the your direction is basically the really give you a really strong foundation into establishing into a PhD into research. But okay, and back to that one for the SOM one. Actually, that isn't a I have to clarify, it isn't a separate application. So it was part of the RBA nomination, and then they have a separate judging panel that do. So they had personnel from a SOM Foundation and part of their London office, and they picked the projects from the nominated list. So there wasn't a separate application or form or as abstract you have to do. So it was part of that. But in terms of traveling, I would say because of the studio that I was in, we had the opportunity to go to different like the less mainstream areas, and then with the tutors and their expertise, you get to be exposed to how you would look at certain things. Like I think reflecting to what Alfa said, you like, and your comment on the university project brief, like tourism and all the sort of more standard and textbook approach. But I think it's always down to us to to identify what means the most to you. Because I think one of the quote I use in part of my project is called from Marcel Proust. It's like the only real voyage of discovery consists not only in seeking new landscape but in having new eyes. I think that kind of summarize what is important. Is not no longer just about the thing that you look at, but about how you understand, how you read from it. So that could be one of the interesting bit for anyone travel, and what you take out of it and what you learn and then what you do after. Yeah.
Agree.
Thank you so much. Wow. I feel like today's session, I have learned so much. I mean, it has been a while that, I mean, thank you both of your sharing. I think it's really, really inspiring, and I hope it inspire the rest of you who listen and stay through with us for the 2 hour and a half as well. So yeah, I think we are coming to an end of the 20th session of concrete matter design sharing. Anyone has any last word to add? Gary, you want to crack a joke?
No, I just got a little bit goosebump when you invited Alpha, because I know her, and then somehow it's good to catch up again, and so nice to see you here, Sun Yen.
Yeah.
Maybe we can catch up again in London. Really
I
would be more than
also
happy to meet you out. Yeah.
feel that today's topic, it's really, I feel it's heavy in a sense and also interesting. And we managed to bridge like two speakers who somehow share somewhat like a similar theme. I feel it's much more important and definitely beyond architecture, with the political layers and also social cultural layers. So I hope one day we continue to bring this spirit and then spread this inspirational message to our peers, that we should definitely look architecture as a practice more than the object itself.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe I can conclude, because saying that,
Mm.
today's session kind of teach me or strengthen my mind in a way that
Belief.
architecture is not about how we do it. Like even though Sun Yan's drawing and also Alpha presented their drawings really nice, but also why we doing it is about the interest. It's all about the passion driving us, why we are still keen in and put a certain hope in this profession, regardless of how shitty is going on with the low pay and whatsoever. But we still have this interest, and that really keeps me kind of very optimistic about the new generation, and also all the young people.
Oh my God, speaking of low pay, that would be like a entire separate session. That we need
Because
to balance low pay and passion. Yes, you want to cue Lana advertisement right now? Just do
yes,
it.
because Lanai also recently launched a survey on low pay wages,
Yes.
very specifically targeting on COVID situation. So if you are
Yes.
interested, I mean, would be very strongly encouraging you guys. Feel free to fill up the form. It will help us a lot to to address this issue, because I think certain institute didn't really take this quite seriously. But okay, so we're gonna do it anyway.
Yeah, I think if you want, you can just drop the survey in the chat box. Then you guys can share.
Yeah.
I think the survey is gonna close soon, but I think your input is very important to help us to determine that what is the threshold and what is the expectation that the Malaysian architecture graduate specifically, it's, surviving in the community, but don't know what to do, what to look for. When you started a job, you don't even know how much you should ask, and being exploited or not, you also don't know. Am I right? All right, we should end in a happy tone.
Wait, I can't fill that in, right? Because we haven't got away. I can't. So only those that have graduated, right? So I'll be sending it to my graduated friends. Right?
I think even if you are, is it only for graduated?
Just for those who had working experience.
Yeah.
Because we
Internship
want to know the
counts?
salary. Internship, I don't think so. It's a bit more to
see.
part one, part one.
Yeah, just share around and see, just help our community around. Yeah.
Thanks.
So to end this session, we would like to invite everyone to turn on their camera to take a zombie. So yeah, so the zombie will start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Smile. Hi there, Kuma. Never see you. You want to say hello? Hi. Nice to meet you.
I'm Tanesh.
Oh, hi, Tanish.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you.
I would like to say today's session was really inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Sunyan and Afaf.
Yes, you pronounced it right.
Really inspired me a lot.
Are you friends of any of the speakers?
No, I just got this from Instagram.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
It was really awesome.
Are you a student?
I'm a student. I'm an architecture student
from
Siti University.
Ah, okay, that's great.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you
doing
so
my
much.
diploma, and I'm not like a degree student or anything. I'm just doing my diploma.
Okay.
I just like to say today's session was really inspiring.
You're in your year 1, like year 2?
My year 2.
I see. I see.
And Afaf, your experience was really bold. Yeah, I mean, like,
too bold for me too.
and Mr. Sunyan really I really enjoyed his the Cuba, I forgot the capital, Havana, yeah. It was really nice. I would just like to thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
All right. Good night or good morning, everyone. Have a good day and a good night. Okay. All right. See you the next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.